look, Joe Biden, he has been talking out about Israel. He's been suggesting that it's starting to lose international support over its basic bombing campaign of Gaza. I also noticed as well the Israeli ambassador to the UK, she was speaking out. Let's just listen to what she had to say.
I think it's about time for the world to realize the Oslo paradigm failed on the 7th of October, and we need to build a new one. And in order to build a new one...
Does that new one include the Palestinians living in a state of their own? Is that what it includes?
I think the biggest question is what type of Palestinians are on the other side? This is what Israel realized on the 7th of October. Though? The answer is absolutely no, and I'll tell you why.
Well, then
because
how can
at the moment, no.
Well, Rishi Sunak, he was basically speaking out about the same issue. Listen.
That a two-state solution is the right outcome here, and more immediately, what's going on is incredibly concerning.
Let me start with you on this one, Matt. Let's kind of go to the top level about what Joe Biden was saying about Israel losing international support. Do you agree with that?
I'm not sure, actually. I think it depends, firstly, on what country you're talking about and who you're surveying. Look, my view on this is Israel has every right to do what it needs to do in order to secure its own safety, the safety of its citizens, and it needs to dismantle the Islamist terrorist organisation Hamas. So that's the starting point. Any discussion about two-state solutions, the future of Gaza, so on, has to come after that point. And the other thing, Michelle, is, I'm struck by the standard to which we hold Israel, because I don't recall in the aftermath of 9/11 or 7/7 or the atrocities in Paris in 2015, I don't recall us having the same discussions about international support for interventions led by the United States or how we were dealing with terrorists and so forth. But when it comes to Israel, they are constantly held up to this standard. We constantly talk about proportionality in a way that we don't talk about it when it comes to other interventions in countries around the world. What I am concerned about in the papers, by the way, today, is how British Jews feel. And they feel, as the new polling has shown, they feel less safe than they ever have in Britain. They feel less confident in established media. Their support for organisations like the BBC has declined sharply. And they feel, I think understandably, as though very few people are actually on their side and defending them within this sort of public relations battle that we're all having over the conflict. So the starting point and the end point for me, at least at this point, is Israel has every right to do what it needs to do to dismantle Hamas and to give its own people security and safety.
Do you agree with that, Aaron?
No, not at all. I think if you look at the vote in the General Assembly in terms of who supports the ceasefire and who doesn't, 153 countries voted for a ceasefire, 10 against, 23 abstained. Obviously, Israel, the US voted against. They were joined by geopolitical giants such as Guatemala and Liberia. We were joined by geopolitical giants in abstaining like Tonga and Togo. So apart from us and Germany, and of course the US, there's no big countries siding with Israel at the UN. Now, responding to what Matt said about why are we treating Israel differently, the point of Zionism is that Israel wants to be a normal country. And if you're a normal country, you have to be clear about what your borders are. So where are Israel's borders? And that goes back to the point of what Sipi Hateveli was saying about, do you want a two-state solution or not? If Israel has clearly delimited borders and there is a distinct Palestinian state in the West Bank or Gaza, or even just the West Bank or whatever, then I think we can talk about Israel as it's a country responding to something as you'd expect any other country to. That's what makes it different. We don't know what Israel's borders are, and it's that ambiguity which actually gets to the very heart of the problem. Finally, look, there are plenty of people in the Israeli government who actually want to basically expel 2.5 million Gazans. Not everyone, not Netanyahu, but people in that government, and they want them to go to Egypt. And the Egyptians have said that they would just send them to Europe. So when people are watching this saying, well, look, this is interesting, it's obviously bad, I sympathise with Israel or the Gazans or both or whatever, it also is of importance to Europe because we're looking at potentially 2.5 million people coming to Europe as refugees, maximum. That's not likely, but it's up to 2.5 million people. And if nothing else, our foreign policy in this country should be about how do we minimise the number of displaced people in our near abroad coming into Europe as refugees, because people in Europe and in the UK don't want more refugees. And it's almost like our foreign policy is about how can we create as many refugees as possible. And so I think common sense here really is a ceasefire, a two-state solution. And I think Zippy Hetzeveli speaking, please.
It's very easy, though, to say ceasefire, two-state solution. You know full well, firstly, that a ceasefire, the one thing that will do, foremost, is allow Hamas to regroup and to continue as a terrorist organisation.
Well,
so what do we do
about the two-state solution.
What do we do with Hamas?
Sure.
How do we dismantle Hamas?
Sure.
That's the starting point.
The starting point is Israel needs to recognise that there is a strong case and an arguable case for a two-state solution. As long as you have, and she is a diplomat. This is not some gunslinger for an Israeli newspaper. She's a diplomat. She's speaking on behalf of the Israeli government. As long as you have people like her saying we cannot have a two-state solution, this isn't going away.
Would you want to live next door? Would you want to live literally next door to a collection of people that are very intent on destroying your innocent civilians?
I would want strong, internationally recognised borders, if necessary, militarised borders. The point is there aren't borders. We don't know if those Palestinians are in Israel or if they're not in Israel, because Israel won't recognise the state of Palestine. That would be, for me, the starting point. And you can say we want a demilitarised zone in Gaza. I think that probably makes sense. The West Bank less so. But you have to accept the necessity of a two-state solution. And the fact that you've got a senior Israeli diplomat suggesting no. And look, Biden said the exact same thing the night before. The problem with this particular government is they don't want a two-state solution. Previous administrations have done. It's a major, major problem. You cannot get a solution to this. You cannot get a solution to this without that.
You can't get any solution until you completely dismantle the terrorist organisation called Hamas. That's the starting point. The starting point was the atrocities committed on October 7th. So we can have a discussion about a two-state solution, but that conversation has to come. Well, as the IDF said today, Hamas can begin this process by surrendering. The remaining fighters can surrender. You can then start to work towards some kind of organisation that is representative of Palestinians, that isn't committed to the murder and genocide of Jews. You can try and bring in other states in the region to try and ensure, a more representative body that can oversee Gaza. And we say these things like two-state solution. Well, who's running the state?
Well, can I respond to that quickly?
Who's running the state? Because having a violent Islamist terrorist organisation running that state is simply not a proposition that Israel would consider.
I understand that. And that would be a very strong argument if you didn't have in the West Bank the Palestinian Authority, which recognises the state of Israel, running that part of, what would be a Palestinian state in the West Bank that is not run by Hamas. And guess what? Israel is still killing hundreds of people there. So that argument would be watertight were it not for Israeli attacks on West Bank. Combine that with what Zippy Hetzeveli is saying, combine that with what Joe Biden's saying, it's quite clear to me that Israel's stance means there cannot be a solution here. Obviously, Hamas has planned for October 7th.
It's not only Israel's stance.
Of course it's not. But what she is saying, and that position with regards to the West Bank, shows there cannot be a solution. There cannot be a solution. It's impossible.
But do you think Hamas want this two-state solution to live peacefully, happily ever after, alongside each other?
Well, I'm sure there are some people in Hamas who do, but their leadership broadly don't. And I think that's a really good point. But then which brings us back to the West Bank. They're run by the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority, for people watching this, they are not Hamas. They have recognised the state of Israel since the mid-1990s. We had the Oslo Accords in 92-94. They said, we recognise you in response, no more settlements here. Every single day for the last 30 years, there have been new Israeli settlements in the West Bank. And people like Joe Biden or the Labour Party or even the Tories say, you can't have more settlements in the West Bank. But they go on and on and on and on. Because it goes back to what Joe Biden was saying, for a big part of Israeli civil society and this very right-wing government, they want them all out. They do want them all out. We have to be honest about this. There are awful, evil people in Hamas. There are also people in the Israeli government who want to expel millions of people. And again, sensible, pragmatic people in this country say, well, look, sad, not our problem. It is, because they will eventually come to Europe.
I don't think anybody in Britain is saying this isn't our problem. I think a lot of people, thankfully, are very concerned about what has been committed, the atrocities that have been committed against Israel. And I think if you look at the polling on this, a lot of people in Britain have sympathy with Israel's need to secure its own territory and provide security and safety for its own people.
I have sympathy with it. But I still think it's a two-state solution.
Yes, but that, as I say, they're two separate conversations. We can all say ceasefire. We know a ceasefire won't resolve this
No,
issue.
I said
And we can all say
two-state
two-state solution, but we know that that comes after Israel's response to October 7th. It was Hamas that launched the attacks. It was Hamas that murdered
Hamas
and
aren't
raped
in the West Bank.
and raped. This is about the conflict and about how we
Killing
started.
people in the West Bank. Hamas aren't in the West Bank.
It's not. You're turning this into a separate point.
No, if they were just killing people in Gaza, I'd say fine, but they're not.
The reason this conflict has begun was because of the mass murder, rape, and brutality committed by Hamas against Jews.
So why kill people in the West Bank? Hamas aren't in the West Bank. This was an attack from Gaza by Hamas. So why kill people hundreds of miles away in the West Bank?
One of the beginning point to resolving the whole conflict, this whole issue, firstly, is the removal of Hamas.
Who aren't in the West Bank?
But
a lot of them aren't even in Gaza. A lot of the leaders of Hamas are not even in Gaza.
No,
indeed.
quite.
But, I mean, are we any further to getting the answer to the resolution to the situation? Do you think that the UK was right to abstain from the UN? So what we was talking about, Aaron was just referencing the UN General Assembly. They had a vote, basically, about whether or not, essentially, to have a ceasefire. The UK abstained from that. Do you think they should have done?
I think so, yes. I think it's very easy to say, let's have a ceasefire without thinking through what that actually means. A ceasefire, look, nobody in Britain or elsewhere is condoning and cheering on what is happening in Gaza. Everybody, I think, of sound mind thinks it's absolutely horrific, and the loss of life is beyond words and what we've seen coming out of Gaza. But at the same time, it's very easy for people to say, let's have a ceasefire without thinking through the practical implications of that, the most important of which is you essentially allow the organisation which committed the atrocities on October 7th to regroup, and you make it less likely that Israel will be able to secure its own territory and provide safety to its own people. So, you know, it's easy to throw these words around. It's less easy to think through the consequences and what that will entail for Israel.
What do you guys make to it at home? I mean, one thing is for certain, isn't it? There's just more and more people getting killed every single day, most of whom are, of course, innocent people. What is